Hello everyone, welcome to the Listen and Sleep channel. The channel shares good, meaningful books that you should listen to before falling asleep. Today's video will not be long. We will come to part 2 of the book about Elon Musk's biography by author Walter Isaacson. Let's start. Hardcore. From the very beginning of his career, Musk was a demanding manager, contemptuous of the concept of work-life balance. At Zip2 and every subsequent company, he drove himself relentlessly all day and through much of the night, without vacations, and he expected others to do the same. His only indulgence was allowing breaks for intense video game binges. The Zip2 team won second place in a national Quake competition. They would have come in first, he says, but one of them crashed his computer by pushing it too hard. When the other engineers went home, Musk would sometimes take the code they were working on and rewrite it. With his weak empathy gene, he didn't realize or care that correcting someone publicly, or, as he put it, fixing their fucking stupid code, was not a path to endearment. He had never been a captain of a sports team or the leader of a gang of friends, and he lacked an instinct for camaraderie. Like Steve Jobs, he genuinely did not care if he offended or intimidated the people he worked with, as long as he drove them to accomplish feats they thought were impossible. "It's not your job to make people on your team love you," he said at a SpaceX executive session years later. In fact, that's counterproductive. He was toughest on Kimball. "I love my brother very much, but working with him was hard," Kimball says. Their disagreements often led to rolling on the office floor fights. They fought over major strategy, minor slights, and the name Zip2. Kimball and a marketing firm came up with it. Elon hated it. "Growing up in South Africa, fighting was normal," Elon says. "It was part of the culture. They had no private offices, just cubicles, so everyone had to watch." In one of their worst fights, they wrestled to the floor and Elon seemed ready to punch Kimball in the face, so Kimball bit his hand and tore off a hunk of flesh. Elon had to go to the emergency room for stitches and a tetanus shot. "When we had intense stress, we just didn't notice anyone else around us," says Kimball. He later admitted that Elon was right about Zip2. It was a shitty name. True product people have a compulsion to sell directly to consumers, without middlemen muddying things up. Musk was that way. He became frustrated by Zip2's strategy of relegating itself to being an unbranded vendor to the newspaper industry. "We wound up beholden to the papers," Musk says. He wanted to buy the domain name, city.com, and become a consumer destination again, competing with Yahoo and AOL. The investors were also having second thoughts about their strategy. City guides and internet directories were proliferating by the fall of 1998. And none had shown a profit. So CEO Rich Sorkin decided to merge with one of them, City Search, in the hope that together they could succeed. But when Musk met with the CEO of City Search, the man made him uneasy. With the help of Kimball and some of the engineers, Elon led a rebellion that scuttled the merger. He also demanded that he be made CEO again. Instead, the board removed him as chair and diminished his role. "Great things will never happen with VCs or professional managers," Musk told Incorporated magazine. "They don't have the creativity or the insight." One of the more Davido partners, Derek Proudian, was installed as interim CEO and tasked with selling the company. "This is your first company," he told Musk. "Let's find an acquirer and make some money, so you can do your second, third, and fourth company." The millionaire. In January 1999, less than 4 years after Elon and Kimball launched Zip2, Proudian called them into his office and told them that Compaq Computer, which was seeking to juice up its AltaVista search engine, had offered $307 million in cash. The brothers had split their 12% ownership stake 60-40, so Elon at age 27 walked away with $22 million and Kimball with $15 million. Elon was astonished when the check arrived at his apartment. "My bank account went from, like, $5,000 to $22,005,000, he says. The Musks gave their father $300,000 out of the proceeds and their mother $1 million. Elon bought an 1,800 square foot condo and splurged on what for him was the ultimate indulgence: a $1 million McLaren F1 sports car, the fastest production car in existence. He agreed to allow CNN to film him taking delivery. "Just 3 years ago I was showering at the Y and sleeping on the office floor, and now I've got a $1 million car," he said as he hopped around in the street, while the car was unloaded from a truck. After the impulsive outburst, he realized that the giddy display of his newfound taste for wealth was unseemly. "Some could interpret the purchase of this car as behavior characteristic of an imperialist brat," he admitted. "My values may have changed, but I'm not consciously aware of my values having changed." Had they changed? His new wealth allowed his desires and impulses to be subject to fewer restraints, which was not always a pretty sight. But his earnest, mission-driven intensity remained intact. The writer Michael Gross was in Silicon Valley reporting a piece for Tina Brown's Glossy Talk magazine on newly rich technobrats. "I was looking for an ostentatious lead character who might warrant skewering," Gross recalled years later. "But the Musk I met in 2000 was bursting with joie de vivre, too likable to skewer. He had the same insouciance and indifference to expectations he does now, but he was easy, open, charming, and funny. Celebrity was enticing for a kid who had grown up with no friends. I'd like to be on the cover of Rolling Stone," he told CNN. But he would end up having a conflicted relationship with wealth. "I could go and buy one of the islands of the Bahamas and turn it into my personal fiefdom, but I am much more interested in trying to build and create a new company," he said. "I haven't spent all my winnings. I'm going to put almost all of it back to a new game." 11. Justine. Romance drama. When Musk eased into the driver's seat of his new $1 million McLaren, he said to the CNN reporter taping the scene, "The real payoff is the sense of satisfaction in having created a company." At that point, a beautiful, willowy young woman who was his girlfriend put her arms around him. Yes, but the car as well," she cooed. "The car. Let's be honest." Musk seemed slightly embarrassed and looked down to check the messages on his phone. Her name was Justine Wilson, though when he first met her at Queen's University she was still using her more prosaic given name, Jennifer. Like Musk, she had been a bookworm as a kid, though her tastes ran to dark fantasy novels rather than sci-fi. She had been raised in a small river town northeast of Toronto, and fancied that she would become a writer. With flowing hair and a mysterious smile, she managed to be radiant and sultry at the same time, like a character out of the romance novel that she hoped to write someday. She met Musk when she was a freshman and he was a sophomore at Queen's. After seeing her at a party, he asked her out for ice cream. She agreed to go with him the following Tuesday, but when he came by her room she was gone. "What's her favorite ice cream?" he asked a friend of hers. "Vanilla chocolate chip," he was told. So he bought a cone and walked around campus until he found her studying a Spanish text in the student center. "I think this is your favorite flavor," he said, handing her the dripping cone. "He's not a man who takes no for an answer," she says. Justine at the time was breaking up with someone who seemed much cooler, a writer who sported a soul patch of hair on his chin. "I thought the soul patch was a dead giveaway that the guy was a douche," says Musk. "So I convinced her to go out with me," he told her. "You have a fire in your soul. I see myself in you." She was impressed by his aspirations. "Unlike other ambitious people, he never talked about making money," she says. "He assumed that he would be either wealthy or broke, but nothing in between. What interested him were the problems he wanted to solve." His indomitable will, whether for making her date him or for building electric cars, mesmerized her. Even when it seemed like crazy talk, you would believe him because he believed it. They dated only sporadically before he left Queen's for Penn, but they stayed in touch, and he sometimes sent her roses. She spent a year teaching in Japan and jettisoned the name Jennifer, because it was far too common and the name of a lot of cheerleaders. When she returned to Canada, she told her sister, "If Elon ever calls me again, I think I'll go for it. I might have missed something there." The call came when he visited New York City to meet with the Times about Zip 2. He asked her to join him there. The weekend went so well that he invited her to fly back with him to California. She did. He had not yet sold Zip 2, so they lived in his Palo Alto apartment with 2 housemates and a dachshund that wasn't housebroken named Bowie, after David. Most of the time she holed up in their bedroom writing and being antisocial. Friends would not want to stay at my house because Justine was too grumpy, he says. Kimball couldn't stand her. If someone's insecure, they can be very mean, he says. When Musk asked his mother what she thought of Justine, she was typically blunt. She has no redeeming feature. But Musk, who liked edginess in his relationships, was smitten. One night over dinner, Justine recalls, he asked how many kids she wanted to have. 1 or 2, she answered. Although if I could afford nannies, I'd like to have 4. That's the difference between you and me, he said. I just assume that there will be nannies. Then he rocked his arms and said, baby. He was already a strong believer in having kids. Shortly after that, he sold Zip 2 and bought the McLaren. Suddenly there was money for nannies. She joked uneasily that maybe he would not dump her for a beautiful model. Instead, he got down on a bended knee on the sidewalk outside of their house, pulled out a ring, and proposed to her, just like out of a romance novel. Both of them were energized by drama, and they thrived by fighting. For somebody who was so amorous about me, he never hesitated to let me know that I was wrong about something, she says. And I would fight back. I realized that I could say anything to him, and it just did not faze him. One day they were with a friend in a McDonald's and started fighting loudly. My friend was mortified, but Elon and I were used to having big arguments in public. There is a combative element to him. I don't think you can be in a relationship with Elon and not argue. On a trip to Paris, they went to see The Lady and the Unicorn tapestries at the Musée de Cluny. Justine began describing what moved her, and she gave a spiritual interpretation involving the unicorn as a Christ-like figure. Musk called that stupid. They began arguing furiously about Christian symbolism. He was just so adamant and furious that I didn't know what I was talking about, that I was stupid and crazy, she says. It was like the things he told me his father said to him. The wedding. When he told me he was going to marry her, I did an intervention, Kimball says. I was like, don't, you must not, this is the wrong person for you. Naved Farouk, who had been with Musk at the party when he first met Justine, tried to stop him as well. But Musk loved both Justine and the turmoil. The wedding was scheduled for a weekend in January 2000 on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. Musk flew in the day before with a prenuptial agreement his lawyers had written. He and Justine drove around the island looking for a notary who would witness it on a Friday evening, but they couldn't find one. She promised that she would sign it when they returned. She ended up doing so 2 weeks later, but the conversation sparked a lot of tension. I think he felt very nervous about getting married and not having this thing signed, she says. That precipitated a fight, and Justine got out of the car and walked to find some of her friends. Later that night, they got back together in the villa but continued fighting. The villas were open air, so all of us could hear the row, Farouk says, and we didn't know what to do about it. At one point Musk stalked out and told his mother that the wedding was off. She was relieved. Now you won't be miserable, she told him. But then he changed his mind and returned to Justine. The tension continued the next day. Kimball and Farouk tried to convince Musk to let them whisk him away to the airport so he could escape. The more they insisted, the more intransigent he became. No, I'm marrying her, he declared. On the surface, the ceremony by the hotel's swimming pool seemed joyous. Justine looked radiant in a sleeveless white dress and a tiara of white flowers, and Musk looked dapper in a tailored tuxedo. Both May and Errol were there, and they even posed for pictures together. After dinner, everyone joined in a conga line, then Elon and Justine took the first dance. He put both arms on her waist. She put her arms around his neck. They smiled and kissed. Then, as they danced, he whispered to her a reminder. I am the alpha in this relationship. 12x.com. An all-in-one bank. When his cousin Pete arrived visited in early 1999, he found Musk poring over books about the banking system. I'm trying to think about what to start next, he explained. His experience at Scotiabank had convinced him that the industry was ripe for disruption. So in March 1999, he founded X.com with a friend from the bank, Harris Fricker. Musk now had the choice he had described to CNN, living like a multimillionaire or leaving his chips on the table to fund a new enterprise. The balance he struck was to invest $12 million in X.com, leaving about $4 million after taxes to spend on himself. His concept for X.com was grand. It would be a one-stop everything store for all financial needs: banking, digital purchases, checking, credit cards, investments, and loans. Transactions would be handled instantly, with no waiting for payments to clear. His insight was that money is simply an entry into a database, and he wanted to devise a way that all transactions were securely recorded in real time. If you fix all the reasons why a consumer would take money out of the system, he says, then it will be the place where all the money is, and that would make it a multi-trillion-dollar company. Some of his friends were skeptical that an online bank would inspire confidence if given a name that sounded like a porn site. But Musk loved the name X.com. Instead of being too clever, like Zip2, the name was simple, memorable, and easy to type. It also allowed him to have one of the coolest email addresses of the time, e@x.com. X would become his go-to letter for naming things, from companies to kids. Musk's management style had not changed from Zip2, nor would it ever. His late-night coding binges followed by his mix of rudeness and detachment during the day led his co-founder Harris and their handful of co-workers to demand that Musk step down as CEO. At one point Musk responded with a very self-aware email. I am by nature obsessive-compulsive, he wrote Fricker. What matters to me is winning, and not in a small way. God knows why. It's probably rooted in some very disturbing psychoanalytical black hole or neural short circuit. Because he held a controlling interest, Musk prevailed and Fricker quit, along with most of the employees. Despite the turmoil, Musk was able to entice the influential head of Sequoia Capital, Michael Moritz, to make a major investment in X.com. Moritz then facilitated a deal with Barclays Bank and a community bank in Colorado to become partners, so that X.com could offer mutual funds, have a bank charter, and be FDIC insured. At 28, Musk had become a startup celebrity. In an article titled, Elon Musk is poised to become Silicon Valley's next big thing, Salon called him today's Silicon Valley guy. One of Musk's management tactics, then as later, was to set an insane deadline and drive colleagues to meet it. He did that in the fall of 1999 by announcing, in what one engineer called a dick move, that X.com would launch to the public on Thanksgiving weekend. In the weeks leading up to that, Musk prowled the office each day, including Thanksgiving, in a nervous-making frenzy, and slept under his desk most nights. One of the engineers who went home at 2 a.m. Thanksgiving morning got a call from Musk at 11 a.m. asking him to come back in because another engineer had worked all night and was not running on full thrusters anymore. Such behavior produced drama and resentments, but also success. When the product went live that weekend, all the employees marched to a nearby ATM, where Musk inserted an X.com debit card. Cash poured out, and the team celebrated. Believing that Musk needed adult supervision, Moritz convinced him to step aside the following month and allow Bill Harris, the former head of Intuit, to become CEO. In a reprise of what had happened at Zip2, Musk remained as chief product officer and board chair, maintaining his frenzied intensity. After one meeting with investors, he went down to the cafeteria, where he had set up some arcade video games. There were several of us playing Street Fighter with Elon, says Relof Bota, the chief financial officer. He was sweating, and you could see that he was a bundle of energy and intensity. Musk developed viral marketing techniques, including bounties for users who signed up friends, and he had a vision of making X.com both a banking service and a social network. Like Steve Jobs, he had a passion for simplicity when it came to designing user interface screens. "I honed the user interface to get the fewest number of keystrokes to open an account," he says. "Originally there were long forms to fill out, including providing a social security number and home address." "Why do we need that?" Musk kept asking. "Delete." One important little breakthrough was that customers didn't need to have usernames. Their email address served that purpose. One driver of growth was a feature that they originally thought was no big deal: the ability to send money by email. That became wildly popular, especially on the auction site eBay, where users were looking for an easy way to pay strangers for purchases. Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. As Musk monitored the names of new customers signing up, one caught his eye: Peter Thiel. He was one of the founders of a company named Confinity that had been located in the same building as X.com, and was now just down the street. Both Thiel and his primary co-founder Max Levchin were as intense as Musk, but they were more disciplined. Like X.com, their company offered a person-to-person payment service. Confinity's version was called PayPal. By the beginning of 2000, amid the first signs that the air might be coming out of the internet bubble, X.com and PayPal were engaged in a race to sign up new customers. "It was this crazy competition where we both had insane dollar bonuses to get customers to sign up and refer friends," says Thiel. As Musk later put it, "It was a race to see who would run out of money last." Musk was drawn to the fight with the intensity of a video gamer. Thiel, on the contrary, liked to coolly calculate and mitigate risk. It soon became clear to both of them that the network effect, whichever company got bigger first would then grow even faster, meant that only one would survive. So it made sense to merge rather than turning the competition into a game of Mortal Kombat. Musk and his new CEO Bill Harris scheduled a meeting with Thiel and Levchin in the back room of Evia, a Greek restaurant in Palo Alto. The two sides traded notes about how many users each had, with Musk engaging in some of his usual exaggerations. Thiel asked him how he envisioned potential merger terms. "We would own 90% of the merged company, and you would own 10%, Musk replied. Levchin was not quite sure what to make of Musk. Was he serious? They had roughly equal user bases. He had an extremely serious "I'm not joking" look on his face, but underneath there seemed to be an ironic streak, Levchin says. As Musk later conceded, "We were playing a game." After the PayPal team left the lunch, Levchin told Thiel, "This will never hunt, so let's move on." Thiel, however, was better at reading people. "This is just an opening," he told Levchin. "You just have to be patient with a guy like Elon." The courtship continued through January 2000, causing Musk to postpone his honeymoon with Justine. Michael Moritz, X.com's primary investor, arranged a meeting of the two camps in his Sand Hill Road office. Thiel got a ride with Musk in his McLaren. "So, what can this car do?" Thiel asked. "Watch this," Musk replied, pulling into the fast lane and flooring the accelerator. The rear axle broke and the car spun around, hit an embankment, and flew in the air like a flying saucer. Parts of the body shredded. Thiel, a practicing libertarian, was not wearing a seatbelt, but he emerged unscathed. He was able to hitch a ride up to the Sequoia offices. Musk, also unhurt, stayed behind for a half hour to have his car towed away, then joined the meeting without telling Harris what had happened. Later, Musk was able to laugh and say, "At least it showed Peter I was unafraid of risks," says Thiel. "Yeah, I realized he was a bit crazy." Musk remained resistant to a merger. Even though both companies had about 200,000 customers signed up to make electronic payments on eBay, he believed that X.com was a more valuable company because it offered a broader array of banking services. That put him at odds with Harris, who at one point threatened to resign if Musk tried to scuttle merger talks. "If he quit, that would have been a disaster," Musk says, "because we were trying to raise more financing just as the internet market was weakening." A break came when Musk had a bonding experience with Thiel and Levchin at another lunch, this one at Il Fornaio, a white tablecloth Italian restaurant in Palo Alto. They had waited a long time without being served, so Harris barged into the kitchen to see what dishes he could extract. Musk, Thiel, and Levchin looked at each other and exchanged glances. Here was this extreme extrovert business development type acting like he had an S on his chest, and the three of us are all very nerdy, Levchin says. We bonded over being the type of people who would never do what Bill did. They agreed to a merger in which X.com would get 55% of the combined company, but Musk almost ruined things soon after by telling Levchin he was getting a steal. Infuriated, Levchin threatened to pull out. Harris drove to his home and helped him fold laundry as he calmed down. The terms were revised once again, to basically a 50-50 merger, but with X.com as the surviving corporate entity. In March 2000, the deal was consummated, and Musk, the largest stockholder, became the chairman. A few weeks later, he joined with Levchin to force Harris out and regained the role of CEO as well. Adult supervision was no longer welcome. PayPal. The electronic payment systems of both companies were folded together and marketed under the brand name PayPal. That became the company's primary offering, and it continued to grow rapidly. But it was not in Musk's nature to make niche products. He wanted to remake entire industries. So he refocused on his original goal of creating a social network that would disrupt the whole banking industry. We have to decide whether we are going to aim big, he told his troops. Some believed Musk's framing was flawed. We had a vast amount of traction on eBay, says Reid Hoffman, an early employee who later co-founded LinkedIn. Max and Peter thought we should focus entirely on that and become a master merchant service. Musk insisted that the company's name should be X.com, with PayPal as merely one of its subsidiary brands. He even tried to rebrand the payment system X-PayPal. There was a lot of pushback, especially from Levchin. PayPal had become a trusted brand name, like a good pal who is helping you get paid. Focus groups showed that the name X.com, on the contrary, conjured up visions of a seedy site you would not talk about in polite company. But Musk was unwavering, and remains so to this day. If you want to just be a niche payment system, PayPal is better, he said. But if you want to take over the world's financial system, then X is the better name. Musk and Michael Moritz went to New York to see if they could recruit Rudy Giuliani, who was just ending his tenure as mayor, to be a political fixer and guide them through the policy intricacies of being a bank. But as soon as they walked into his office, they knew it would not work. It was like walking into a mob scene, Moritz says. He was surrounded by goonish confidants. He didn't have any idea whatsoever about Silicon Valley, but he and his henchmen were eager to line their pockets. They asked for 10% of the company, and that was the end of the meeting. This guy occupies a different planet, Musk told Moritz. Musk restructured the company so that there was not a separate engineering department. Instead, engineers would team up with product managers. It was a philosophy that he would carry through to Tesla, SpaceX, and then Twitter. Separating the design of a product from its engineering was a recipe for dysfunction. Designers had to feel the immediate pain if something they devised was hard to engineer. He also had a corollary that worked well for rockets but less so for Twitter. Engineers rather than the product managers should lead the team. Arm wrestling with Levchin. Peter Thiel drifted away from active involvement in the company, leaving his Confinity co-founder Max Levchin, a low-key and super-sharp Ukrainian-born software wizard, to be the chief technology officer and counterbalance to Musk. Levchin and Musk soon clashed on an issue that sounded technical but was also theological: whether to use Microsoft Windows or Unix as the main operating system. Musk admired Bill Gates, loved Windows NT, and thought Microsoft would be a more reliable partner. Levchin and his team were appalled, feeling that Windows NT was insecure, buggy, and uncool. They preferred using various flavors of Unix-like operating systems, including Solaris and the open-source Linux. One night well after midnight, Levchin was working alone in a conference room when Musk walked in primed to continue the argument. Eventually you will see it my way, Musk said. I know how this movie ends. No, you're wrong, Levchin replied in his flat monotone. It just isn't going to work in Microsoft. You know what? Said Musk. I will arm wrestle you for it. Levchin thought, correctly, that this was the stupidest imaginable way to settle a software coding disagreement. Plus, Musk was almost twice his size. But he was loopy from working late hours and agreed to arm wrestle. He put all his weight into it and promptly lost. Just to be clear, Levchin told him, I'm not going to use your physical weight as any sort of a technical decision input. Musk laughed and said, Yeah, I get it. But he prevailed. He spent a year having his own team of engineers rewrite the Unix coding that Levchin had written for Confinity. We wasted a year doing these technical tap dances instead of building new features. Levchin says. The recoding effort also prevented the company from focusing on the growing amount of fraud that was plaguing the service. The only reason we remained successful was because there were no other companies being funded during that time. Levchin had trouble knowing what to make of Musk. Was his arm wrestling gambit serious? Were his bouts of maniacal intensity punctuated by goofball humor and game-playing calculated or crazed? There's irony in everything he does, says Levchin. He operates on an irony setting that goes up to 11 but never goes below 4. One of Musk's powers was to entice other people into his irony circle so they could share an inside joke. He turns on his irony flamethrower and creates this sense of exclusive Elon Club membership. That didn't work well on Levchin, who was shielded from irony flamethrowers by his earnestness. He had a good radar for detecting Musk's exaggerations. During the merger, Musk kept insisting that X.com had close to twice as many users, and Levchin would check with its engineers and get the real number. Elon didn't just exaggerate, he made it up. Levchin says. It was what his father would have done. And yet, Levchin began to marvel at the counterexamples, such as when Musk astounded him by knowing things. At one point Levchin and his engineers were wrestling with a difficult problem involving the Oracle database they were using. Musk poked his head in the room and, even though his expertise was with Windows and not Oracle, immediately figured out the context of the conversation, gave a precise and technical answer, and walked out without waiting for confirmation. Levchin and his team went back to their Oracle manuals and looked up what Musk had described. One by one, we all said, shit, he's right. Levchin recalls. Elon will say crazy stuff, but every once in a while, he'll surprise you by knowing way more than you do about your own specialty. I think a huge part of the way he motivates people are these displays of sharpness, which people just don't expect from him, because they mistake him for a bullshitter or goofball. 13. The coup. Street fight. By late summer of 2000, Levchin found Musk increasingly difficult to deal with. He wrote Musk long memos outlining how fraud was threatening to bankrupt the company, one of them incongruously titled, Fraud is Love, but all he got in response were terse dismissals. When Levchin developed the first commercial use of CAPTCHA technology to prevent automated fraud, Musk showed little interest. It had an extremely depressive effect on me, Levchin says. He called his girlfriend to say, I think I'm done. Sitting in the lobby of a Palo Alto hotel where he was attending a conference, Levchin told a few colleagues of his plans to leave. They urged him instead to fight back. Others had similar frustrations. His close friends Peter Thiel and Luke Nosek had secretly commissioned a study that showed the PayPal brand was much more valuable than X.com's. Musk was furious and ordered the PayPal brand to be stripped from most of the company's website. By early September, all three, along with Reid Hoffman and David Sachs, had decided it was time to dethrone Musk. Musk had married Justine 8 months earlier, but he had not found time to go on a honeymoon. Fatefully, he decided to take one that September, just when his colleagues were plotting against him. He flew to Australia to attend the Olympics, with stops to meet potential investors in London and Singapore. As soon as he left, Levchin telephoned Thiel and asked if he would come back as CEO, at least on a temporary basis. When Thiel said yes, the rebel group agreed to join hands and confront the board, enlisting other employees to sign a petition supporting their cause. Thus armed and fortified, Thiel and Levchin and their compatriots caravanned up Sand Hill Road to Sequoia Capital's office to present their case to Michael Moritz. Moritz thumbed through the folder with the petition, then asked some specific questions about the software and fraud problems. He agreed that a change was necessary, but said he would support Thiel as CEO only if it was temporary. The company needed to begin a process of recruiting a seasoned top executive. The plotters agreed and headed off to a local dive bar, Antonio's Nut House, to celebrate. Musk began to sense a problem during some of his phone calls from Australia. As usual, he would issue command decisions, but now his normally cowed lieutenants began pushing back. He figured out why 4 days into his trip, when he was copied on an email sent to the board by an employee who extolled Musk's leadership and denounced the plotters. Musk felt blindsided. "This whole thing is making me so sad that words fail me," he emailed. "I have given every last ounce of effort, almost all my cash from Zip2 and put my marriage on the rocks, and yet I stand accused of bad deeds to which I have not even been given an opportunity to respond." Musk called Moritz to try to reverse his decision. He described the coup as being heinous, says Moritz, who has a refined literary sensibility. "I remember, because most people don't use this word." He labeled it a heinous crime. When Moritz refused to back down, Musk quickly bought plane tickets. The only seats he and Justine could get were in coach, and headed home. When he got back to the X.com office, he huddled with some of his loyalists to figure out ways to fend off the coup. After a session that lasted late into the night, he retreated to the video game consoles in the office and played round after round of Street Fighter by himself. Thiel warned executives not to answer Musk's calls. He could be too persuasive or intimidating. But Reid Hoffman, the chief operating officer, felt he owed Musk a conversation. A bear-like entrepreneur with a jovial personality, Hoffman knew Musk's wiles. "He has reality warp powers where people get sucked into his vision," he says. Nevertheless, he decided to meet Musk for lunch. The lunch lasted 3 hours as Musk tried to persuade and cajole Hoffman. "I took all of my money and put it in this company," he said. "I have the right to run it." He also argued against the strategy of focusing just on electronic payments. That should be only an opening act for creating a real digital bank. He had read Clayton Christensen's book The Innovator's Dilemma, and tried to convince Hoffman that the state banking industry could be disrupted. Hoffman disagreed. "I told him that I believed his vision of a superbank was toxic, because we needed to focus on our payment service on eBay," he says. Musk then switched tacks. He tried to persuade Hoffman to become the CEO. Eager to end the lunch, Hoffman agreed to think about it, but quickly decided he wasn't interested. He was a Thiel loyalist. When the board voted to remove Musk as CEO, he responded with a calm and grace that surprised those who had watched his feverish struggle to prevail. "I've decided that the time has come to bring in a seasoned CEO to take X.com to the next level," he wrote in an email to his fellow workers. "After that search is done, my plan is to take a sabbatical for about 3 to 4 months, think through a few ideas, and then start a new company." Although a street fighter, Musk had an unexpected ability to be realistic in defeat. When Jeremy Stoppelman, a Musk acolyte who would later be a founder of Yelp, asked whether he and others should resign in protest, Musk said no. "The company was my baby, and like the mother in the Book of Solomon, I was willing to give it up so it could survive," Musk says. "I decided to work hard at repairing the relationship with Peter and Max." The one remaining source of tension was Musk's desire, as he put it in his email, to do some PR. He had been bitten by the celebrity bug, and he wanted to be a public face of the company. "I'm really the best spokesperson for the company," he told Thiel during a tense meeting in Moritz's office. When Thiel rejected the idea, Musk erupted. "I don't want to have my honor impugned," he shouted. "My honor is worth more than this company to me." Thiel was baffled about why this was a matter of honor. "He was very dramatic," Thiel recalls. People don't usually talk with such a superheroic, almost Homeric kind of vibe in Silicon Valley. Musk remained the largest shareholder and a member of the board, but Thiel barred him from speaking for the company. Risk seeker. For the second time in 3 years, Musk had been pushed out of a company. He was a visionary who didn't play well with others. What struck his colleagues at PayPal, in addition to his relentless and rough personal style, was his willingness, even desire, to take risks. Entrepreneurs are actually not risk takers, says Relof Bota. They're risk mitigators. They don't thrive on risk, they never seek to amplify it. Instead, they try to figure out the controllable variables and minimize their risk. But not Musk. He was into amplifying risk and burning the boats, so we could never retreat from it. To Bota, Musk's McLaren crash was like a metaphor: floor it and see how fast it goes. That made Musk fundamentally different from Thiel, who always focused on limiting risks. He and Hoffman once planned to write a book on their experience at PayPal. The chapter on Musk was going to be titled, "The Man Who Didn't Understand the Meaning of the Word Risk." Risk addiction can be useful when it comes to driving people to do what seems impossible. He's amazingly successful getting people to march across a desert, Hoffman says. He has a level of certainty that causes him to put all of his chips on the table. That was more than just a metaphor. Many years later, Levchin was at a friend's bachelor pad hanging out with Musk. Some people were playing a high-stakes game of Texas Hold'em. Although Musk was not a card player, he pulled up to the table. There were all these nerds and sharpsters who were good at memorizing cards and calculating odds, Levchin says. Elon just proceeded to go all in on every hand and lose. Then he would buy more chips and double down. Eventually, after losing many hands, he went all in and won. Then he said, "Right, fine, I'm done." It would be a theme in his life: avoid taking chips off the table, keep risking them. That would turn out to be a good strategy. Look at the two companies he went on to build, SpaceX and Tesla, says Thiel. Silicon Valley wisdom would be that these were both incredibly crazy bets. But if two crazy companies work that everyone thought couldn't possibly work, then you say to yourself, I think Elon understands something about risk that everybody else doesn't. PayPal went public in early 2002 and was acquired by eBay that July for $1.5 billion. Musk's payout was around $250 million. Afterward, he called up his nemesis Max Levchin and suggested they get together in the company parking lot. Levchin, a small and wiry guy who had occasionally harbored vague fears that Musk might one day beat him up, replied half-jokingly, "You want to have a fist fight behind the school?" But Musk was sincere. He sat on the curb looking sad and asked Levchin, "Why did you turn on me?" "I honestly believed it was the right thing to do," Levchin replied. "You were completely wrong. The company was about to die, and I felt I had no other choice." Musk nodded. A few months later, they had dinner in Palo Alto. "Life's too short," Musk told him. "Let's move on." He did the same with Peter Thiel, David Sachs, and some of the other cool leaders. "I was pretty angry at first," Musk told me in the summer of 2022. "I had thoughts of assassination running through my head. But eventually I realized that it was good I got cooped. Otherwise I'd still be slaving away at PayPal." Then he paused for a few moments and let out a little laugh. "Of course, if I had stayed, PayPal would be $1 trillion company. There was a coda." At the time of this conversation, Musk was in the midst of buying Twitter. As we walked in front of a high bay where his Starship rocket was being prepared for a test, he returned to the topic of what his grand vision for X.com had been. "That's what Twitter could become," he said. "If you combine a social network with a payments platform, you could create what I wanted X.com to be. Malaria." Musk's ouster as PayPal's CEO allowed him to have a true vacation, the first time that he had a week-long holiday from work. It would also be the last time. He was not made for vacations. Along with Justine and Kimball, he went to Rio to see his cousin Russ Rive, who had moved there after marrying a Brazilian woman. From there they went to South Africa to attend the wedding of another relative. It was Musk's first time back after leaving the country 11 years earlier at age 17. Justine had a tough time dealing with Elon's father and grandmother, known as Nana. She had gotten a henna tattoo of a gecko on her leg while in Rio, and it had not yet faded. Nana told Elon that she was a Jezebel, referring to the biblical woman whose name became associated with sexually promiscuous or controlling women. That was the first time I'd ever even heard a woman refer to another woman as a Jezebel, Justine says. I guess the tattoo of the gecko didn't help. They escaped Pretoria as soon as they could for a safari at a high-end game preserve. After getting back to Palo Alto in January 2001, Musk started feeling dizzy. His ears were ringing, and he had recurring waves of chills. So he went to the Stanford Hospital emergency room, where he started throwing up. A spinal tap showed he had a high white blood cell count, which led the doctors to diagnose him with viral meningitis. It's generally not a severe disease, so the doctors rehydrated him and sent him home. Over the next few days he felt progressively worse and at one point was so weak he could barely stand. So he called a taxi and went to a doctor. When she tried to take his pulse, it was barely perceptible. So she called an ambulance, which took him to Sequoia Hospital in Redwood City. A doctor who was an expert in infectious diseases happened to walk past Musk's bed and realized that he had malaria, not meningitis. It turned out to be falciparum malaria, the most dangerous form, and they had caught it just in time. After symptoms become severe, as they had in Musk's case, patients often have only a day or so before the parasite becomes untreatable. He was put into intensive care, where doctors stabbed a needle into his chest for intravenous infusions followed by massive doses of doxycycline. The head of human resources at X.com went to visit Musk in the hospital and sort out his health insurance. He was actually only hours from death. The executive wrote in an email to Thiel and Levchin. His doctor had treated 2 cases of falciparum malaria prior to treating Elon. Both patients died. Thiel remembers that he had a morbid conversation with the HR director after learning that Musk had taken out, on behalf of the company, a key man life insurance policy for $100 million. If he had died, Thiel says, all of our financial problems were going to be solved. It was typical of Musk's outsized personality to take out such a large insurance policy. We're happy that he survived and that gradually everything tracked for the company, so we didn't need the $100 million life insurance policy. Musk remained in intensive care for 10 days, and he did not fully recover for 5 months. He took 2 lessons from his near-death experience. Vacations will kill you. Also, South Africa. That place is still trying to destroy me. 14. Mars. Flying. After his ouster from PayPal, Musk bought a single-engine turboprop and decided to learn how to fly, like his father and grandparents had done. In order to get his pilot's license, he needed 50 hours of training, which he crammed into 2 weeks. I tend to do things very intensely, he says. He had an easy time with the visual flight rules test, but he failed his first instrument flight rules test. You have a hood on, so you can't see outside, and you have half your instruments covered, he says. Then they shut down one engine, and you have to land the plane. I landed it, but the instructor said not good enough. Fail. On the second try, he passed. That emboldened him to take the crazy step of buying a Soviet bloc military jet built in Czechoslovakia called the Aero L-39 Albatros. It's what they used to train their fighter pilots, so it's incredibly acrobatic, he says. But it's a bit dicey, even for me. At one point he and his trainer took it on a low-altitude flight over Nevada. It was just like in Top Gun. You're no more than a couple of 100 feet above the ground, following the contour of the mountains. We did a vertical climb up the side of a mountain and then turned upside down. The flying appealed to his daredevil gene. It also helped him visualize aerodynamics better. It's not just a simple Bernoulli's principle, he says as he launches into an explanation of how wings lift a moving plane. After about 500 hours of flying in the L-39 and other planes, he got a bit bored with it. But the allure of flight remained. Red Planet. On Labor Day weekend of 2001, soon after he had recovered from malaria, Musk went to visit his party pal from Penn, Adio Resi, in the Hamptons. Afterward, driving back to Manhattan on the Long Island Expressway, they talked about what Musk would do next. "I've always wanted to do something in space," he told Resi. "But I don't think there's anything that an individual can do." It was too expensive, of course, for a private person to build a rocket. Or was it? Exactly what were the basic physical requirements? All that was needed, Musk figured, was metal and fuel. Those didn't really cost that much. "By the time we reached the Midtown Tunnel," Resi says, "we decided that it was possible." When he got to his hotel that evening, Musk logged on to the NASA website to read about its plans for going to Mars. "I figured it had to be soon, because we went to the moon in 1969, so we must be about to go to Mars." When he couldn't find the schedule, he rummaged deeper on the site, until he realized that NASA had no plans for Mars. He was shocked. In his Google searches for more information, he happened across an announcement for a dinner in Silicon Valley hosted by an organization called the Mars Society. "That sounds cool," he said to Justine, and he bought a pair of $500 tickets. In fact, he ended up sending in a check for $5,000, which caught the attention of Robert Zubrin, the Society's president. Zubrin sat Elon and Justine at his table, along with the film director James Cameron, who had directed the space war thriller Aliens as well as The Terminator and Titanic. Justine sat next to him. "It was a big thrill for me because I was a huge fan, but he mainly talked to Elon about Mars and why humans would be doomed if they didn't colonize other planets." Musk now had a new mission, one that was loftier than launching an internet bank or digital yellow pages. He went to the Palo Alto Public Library to read about rocket engineering and started calling experts, asking to borrow their old engine manuals. At a gathering of PayPal alumni in Las Vegas, he sat in a cabana by the pool reading a tattered manual for a Russian rocket engine. When one of the alums, Mark Woolway, asked him what he planned to do next, Musk answered, "I'm going to colonize Mars. My mission in life is to make mankind a multiplanetary civilization." Woolway's reaction was unsurprising. "Dude, you're bananas." Reid Hoffman, another PayPal veteran, had a similar reaction. After listening to Musk describe his plan to send rockets to Mars, Hoffman was puzzled. "How is this a business?" he asked. Later Hoffman would realize that Musk didn't think that way. "What I didn't appreciate is that Elon starts with a mission and later finds a way to backfill in order to make it work financially," he says. "That's what makes him a force of nature." Why? It's useful to pause for a moment and note how wild it was for a 30-year-old entrepreneur who had been ousted from 2 tech startups to decide to build rockets that could go to Mars. What drove him, other than an aversion to vacations and a childlike love of rockets, sci-fi, and a hitchhiker's guide to the galaxy? To his bemused friends at the time, and consistently in conversations over the ensuing years, he gave 3 reasons. He found it surprising and frightening that technological progress was not inevitable. It could stop. It could even backslide. America had gone to the moon. But then came the grounding of the shuttle missions and an end to progress. "Do we want to tell our children that going to the moon is the best we did, and then we gave up?" he asks. Ancient Egyptians learned how to build the pyramids, but then that knowledge was lost. The same happened to Rome, which built aqueducts and other wonders that were lost in the Dark Ages. Was that happening to America? "People are mistaken when they think that technology just automatically improves," he would say in a TED Talk a few years later. "It only improves if a lot of people work very hard to make it better." Another motivation was that colonizing other planets would help ensure the survival of human civilization and consciousness in case something happened to our fragile planet. It may someday be destroyed by an asteroid or climate change or nuclear war. He had become fascinated by Fermi's paradox, named after the Italian-American physicist Enrico Fermi, who in a discussion of alien life in the universe said, "But where is everyone?" Mathematically it seemed logical there were other civilizations, but the lack of any evidence raised the uncomfortable possibility that the Earth's human species might be the only example of consciousness. "We've got this delicate candle of consciousness flickering here, and it may be the only instance of consciousness, so it's essential we preserve it," Musk says. "If we are able to go to other planets, the probable lifespan of human consciousness is going to be far greater than if we are stuck on one planet that could get hit by an asteroid or destroy its civilization." His third motivation was more inspirational. It came from his heritage in a family of adventurers and his decision as a teenager to move to a country that had bred into its essence the spirit of pioneers. "The United States is literally a distillation of the human spirit of exploration," he says. "This is a land of adventurers." That spirit needed to be rekindled in America, he felt, and the best way to do that would be to embark on a mission to colonize Mars. To have a base on Mars would be incredibly difficult, and people will probably die along the way, just as happened in the settling of the United States. But it will be incredibly inspiring, and we must have inspiring things in the world. Life cannot be merely about solving problems, he felt. It also had to be about pursuing great dreams. That's what can get us up in the morning. Faring to other planets would be, Musk believed, one of the significant advances in the story of humanity. There are only a handful of really big milestones: single-celled life, multicellular life, differentiation of plants and animals, life extending from the oceans to land, mammals, consciousness, he says. On that scale, the next important step is obvious: making life multiplanetary. There was something exhilarating, and also a bit unnerving, about Musk's ability to see his endeavors as having epoch-making significance. As Max Levchin puts it, one of Elon's greatest skills is the ability to pass off his vision as a mandate from heaven. Los Angeles. Musk decided that, if he wanted to start a rocket company, it was best to move to Los Angeles, which was home to most of the aerospace companies, including Lockheed and Boeing. The probability of success for a rocket company was quite low, and it was even lower if I did not move to Southern California, where the critical mass of aerospace engineering talent was. He didn't explain the move to Justine, who thought it was because he was attracted to the celebrity glamour of the city. Because of their marriage, he was eligible to become a U.S. citizen, which he did in early 2002 at an oath-taking ceremony with 3,500 other immigrants at the Los Angeles County Fairgrounds. Musk began gathering rocket engineers for meetings at a hotel near the Los Angeles airport. "My initial thought was not to create a rocket company, but rather to have a philanthropic mission that would inspire the public and lead to more NASA funding." His first plan was to build a small rocket to send mice to Mars. "But I became worried that we would end up with a tragicomic video of mice slowly dying on a tiny spaceship. That would not be good. So then it came down to, let's send a little greenhouse to Mars." The greenhouse would land on Mars and send back photographs of green plants growing on the red planet. The public would be so excited, the theory went, that it would clamor for more missions to Mars. The proposal was called Mars Oasis, and Musk estimated he could pull it off for less than $30 million. He had the money. The biggest challenge was getting an affordable rocket that could take the greenhouse to Mars. There was, it turned out, a place where he might be able to get one cheaply, or so he thought. Through the Mars Society, Musk heard of a rocket engineer named Jim Cantrell, who had worked on a U.S. Russian program to decommission missiles. A month after his Long Island Expressway ride with Adio Resi, Musk gave Cantrell a call. Cantrell was driving in Utah with the top down on his convertible. "So all I could make out was that some guy named Elon Musk was saying that he was an internet millionaire and needed to talk to me," he later told Esquire. When Cantrell got home and was able to call him back, Musk explained his vision. "I want to change mankind's outlook on being a multiplanetary species," he said. "Can we meet this weekend?" Cantrell had been leading a cloak-and-dagger life because of his dealings with Russian authorities, so he wanted to meet in a safe place without guns. He suggested they meet at the Delta Airlines Club at the Salt Lake City airport. Musk brought Resi, and they came up with a plan to go to Russia to see if they could buy some launch slots or rockets. 15. Rocket Man. Russia. The lunch in the back room of a drab Moscow restaurant consisted of small bites of food interspersed with large shots of vodka. Musk had arrived that morning with Adio Resi and Jim Cantrell on their quest to buy a used Russian rocket for their mission to Mars, and he was ragged after a late night of partying during a stopover in Paris. Plus, he was not an experienced drinker, so he didn't fare well. I calculated the weight of the food and the weight of the vodka, and they were roughly equal, he recalls. After many toasts to friendship, the Russians gave the Americans gifts of vodka bottles with labels that had each person's image on a rendering of Mars. Musk, who was holding his head up with his hand, passed out, and his head slammed into the table. I don't think I impressed the Russians, he says. That evening, slightly recovered, Musk and his companions met with another group in Moscow that purported to be selling decommissioned missiles. That encounter turned out to be equally bizarre. The Russian in charge was missing a front tooth, so whenever he spoke loudly, which was often, spit would fly out in Musk's direction. At one point, when Musk started his talk about the need to make humans multiplanetary, the Russian got visibly upset. This rocket was never meant for capitalists to use it for going to Mars on a bullshit mission, he shouted. Who's your chief engineer? Musk allowed that he was. At that point, Cantrell recalls, the Russian spit at them. Did he just spit on us? Musk asked. Yeah, he did, Cantrell answered. I think it's a sign of disrespect. Despite the clown show, Musk and Cantrell decided to return to Russia in early 2002. Resi didn't come, but Justine did. So did a new member of the team, Mike Griffin, an aerospace engineer who later became the administrator of NASA. This time Musk focused on buying 2 Dnep rockets, which were old missiles. The more he negotiated, the higher the price went. He finally thought he had a deal to pay $18 million for 2 Dneprs. But then they said no, it was $18 million for each. I'm like, dude, that's insane, he says. The Russians then suggested maybe it would be $21 million each. They taunted him, Cantrell recalls. They said, oh, little boy, you don't have the money? It was fortunate that the meetings went badly. It prodded Musk to think bigger. Rather than merely using a second-hand rocket to put a demonstration greenhouse on Mars, he would conceive a venture that was far more audacious, one of the most audacious of our times, privately building rockets that could launch satellites and then humans into orbit and eventually send them to Mars and beyond. I was pretty mad. And when I get mad I try to reframe the problem. First principles. As he stewed about the absurd price the Russians wanted to charge, he employed some first principles thinking, drilling down to the basic physics of the situation and building up from there. This led him to develop what he called an idiot index, which calculated how much more costly a finished product was than the cost of its basic materials. If a product had a high idiot index, its cost could be reduced significantly by devising more efficient manufacturing techniques. Rockets had an extremely high idiot index. Musk began calculating the cost of carbon fiber, metal, fuel, and other materials that went into them. The finished product, using the current manufacturing methods, cost at least 50 times more than that. If humanity was going to get to Mars, the technology of rockets must radically improve. And relying on used rockets, especially old ones from Russia, was not going to push the technology forward. So on the flight home, he pulled out his computer and started making spreadsheets that detailed all of the materials and costs for building a mid-size rocket. Cantrell and Griffin, sitting in the row behind him, ordered drinks and laughed. What the fuck do you think that idiot savant is doing up there? Griffin asked Cantrell. Musk turned around and gave them an answer. Hey guys, he said, showing them the spreadsheet. I think we can build this rocket ourselves. When Cantrell looked at the numbers, he said to himself, I'll be damned, that's why he's been borrowing all my books. Then he asked the flight attendant for another drink. SpaceX. When Musk decided he wanted to start his own rocket company, his friends did what true friends do in such a situation. they staged an intervention. "Whoa, dude, I got screwed by the Russians does not equal create a launch company," Adio Resi told him. Resi made a highlight reel of dozens of rockets blowing up, and he corralled friends to fly to Los Angeles, where they gathered with Musk to talk him out of it. "They made me watch a reel of rockets exploding, because they wanted to convince me that I would lose all my money," Musk says. The arguments about the risk served to strengthen Musk's resolve. He liked risk. "If you're trying to convince me this has a high probability of failure, I am already there," he told Resi. "The likeliest outcome is that I will lose all my money. But what's the alternative? That there be no progress in space exploration? We've got to give this a shot, or we're stuck on Earth forever." It was a rather grandiose mandate from heaven assessment of how indispensable he was to the progress of humankind. But like many of Musk's most laughable assertions, it contained a kernel of truth. "I wanted to hold out hope that humans could be a space-faring civilization and be out there among the stars," he says. "And there was no chance of that unless a new company was started to create revolutionary rockets." Musk's space adventure had begun as a non-profit endeavor to inspire interest in a mission to Mars, but now he had the combination of motivations that would mark his career. He would do something audacious that was driven by a grand idea. But he also wanted it to be practical and profitable, so that it could sustain itself. That meant using the rockets to launch commercial and government satellites. He decided to start with a smaller rocket that would not be too costly. "We're going to be doing dumb things, but let's just not do dumb things on a large scale," he told Cantrell. Instead of launching large payloads, as Lockheed and Boeing did, Musk would create a less expensive rocket for the smaller satellites that were being made possible by advances in microprocessors. He focused on one key metric: what it cost to get each pound of payload into orbit. That goal of maximizing boost for the buck would guide his obsession with increasing the thrust of the engines, reducing the mass of the rockets, and making them reusable. Musk tried to recruit the 2 engineers who had accompanied him to Moscow. But Mike Griffin did not want to move to Los Angeles. He was working for In-Q-Tel, a CIA-funded venture firm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and he was looking at a promising future in science policy. Indeed, President George W. Bush appointed him to be NASA administrator in 2005. Jim Cantrell considered joining, but he asked for a lot of job guarantees that Musk was unwilling to meet. So Musk ended up being, by default, the company's chief engineer. Musk incorporated space exploration technologies in May 2002. At first he called the company by its initials SET. A few months later, he highlighted his favorite letter by moving to a more memorable moniker, SpaceX. Its goal, he said in an early presentation, was to launch its first rocket by September 2003 and to send an unmanned mission to Mars by 2010. Thus continued the tradition he had established at PayPal, setting unrealistic timelines that transformed his wild notions from being completely insane to being merely very late. 16. Fathers and Sons. Baby Nevada. Just as Elon was launching SpaceX in May 2002, Justine gave birth to their first child, a boy, named Nevada because he had been conceived at the annual Burning Man festival held in that state. When he was 10 weeks old, the whole family went to Laguna Beach, just south of Los Angeles, for a cousin's wedding. During the reception, a manager at the hotel came in looking for the Musks. Something had happened to their baby, he said. When they got back to the room, paramedics were intubating Nevada and giving him oxygen. The nanny explained that he had been sleeping in his crib, on his back, and at some point had stopped breathing. The cause was probably sudden infant death syndrome, an unexplained malady that is the leading cause of infant mortality in developed countries. By the time the paramedics resuscitated him, he had been deprived of oxygen for so long that he was brain dead, Justine later said. Kimball rode to the hospital with Elon, Justine, and the baby. Even though he had been declared brain dead, Nevada was kept on life support for 3 days. When they finally made the decision to turn off the breathing machine, Elon felt his last heartbeat, and Justine held him in her arms and felt his death rattle. Musk sobbed uncontrollably. He cried like a wolf. His mother says. Cried like a wolf. Because Elon said he could not bear returning home, Kimball arranged for them to stay at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. The manager gave them the presidential suite. Elon asked him to get rid of Nevada's clothes and toys, which had been brought to the hotel. It was 3 weeks before Musk could bear to go home and see what had once been his son's room. Musk processed his grief silently. Naved Farouk, his friend from Queen's University, flew to Los Angeles and stayed with him right after he returned home. Justine and I tried to draw him into conversations about what happened, but he did not want to talk about it, Farouk says. Instead, they watched movies and played video games. At one point, after a long silence, Farouk asked, "How are you feeling? How are you dealing with it?" Musk completely shut down the conversation. "I've known him long enough to read his face," Farouk says. "I could tell he was determined not to talk about it." Justine, on the contrary, was very open about her emotions. "He wasn't very comfortable with me expressing my feelings over Nevada's death," she says. "He told me I was being emotionally manipulative, wearing my heart on my sleeve." She attributes his emotional repression to the defense mechanisms he developed during childhood. "He shuts down emotions when in dark places," she says. "I think it's a survival thing with him." Errol arrives. When Nevada was born, Elon invited his father to fly from South Africa to see his grandson. It offered Elon a chance, 13 years after he left South Africa, to reconcile with Errol, or at least to exorcise some demons. Elon was Dad's first son, and maybe he had something to prove to him, Kimball says. Errol brought his new wife, their 2 young children, and his wife's 3 children from her previous marriage. Elon paid for all 7 tickets. When they arrived in Raleigh, North Carolina, after the first leg of their flight from Johannesburg, Errol was paged by a Delta Air Lines representative. "We have some bad news," he was told. "Your son wants us to tell you that Nevada, your grandson, has died." Elon wanted to make sure the airline representative broke the news because he could not bear to speak the words himself. When Errol got on the phone, Kimball explained the situation and said, "Dad, you shouldn't come." He tried to convince him to turn around and fly back to South Africa. Errol refused. "No, we're already in the US, so we are coming to Los Angeles." Errol remembers being astounded at the size of the penthouse at the Beverly Wilshire. "Probably the most amazing thing I have ever seen." Elon seemed to be in a trance, but he was also very needy, in a complex way. He was uncomfortable having his blustery father see him in such a vulnerable state, but he also did not want him to leave. He ended up urging his father and his new family to stay in Los Angeles. "I don't want you to go back," he said. "I will buy you a house here." Kimball was appalled. No, this is a bad idea," he told Elon. "You're forgetting that he's a dark human. Do not do this to yourself." But the harder he tried to talk his brother out of it, the sadder Elon got. Years later, Kimball wrestled with what yearnings were motivating his brother. Watching his own son die, I think that was what drove him to want his father near him. He told me. Elon bought a house in Malibu for Errol and his brood, along with the biggest Land Rover he could find, and he arranged for the children to be put into good schools and chauffeured there each day. But things quickly got weird. Elon was getting concerned that Errol, who was then 56, was becoming uncomfortably attentive to one of his stepdaughters, Jana, who was then 15. Elon became furious at his father because of what he perceived as his inappropriate behavior, and he had developed a deep sympathy and tugging sense of kinship for Errol's stepchildren. He knew what they had to live with. So he offered to buy Errol a yacht to be harbored 45 minutes from Malibu. If he agreed to live there on his own, he could see his family on weekends. That was not only a weird idea but also a bad one. It made the whole situation stranger. Errol's wife, who was 19 years younger than he, began deferring to Elon. She saw Elon now as the provider in her life and not me, Errol says, and so it became a problematic situation. One day when Errol was on the boat, he got a message from Elon. "This situation is not working," he said, and he asked Errol to go back to South Africa. Errol did. A few months later, his wife and family moved back as well. "I tried threats, rewards, and arguments to change my father for the better," Elon later said. And Musk breaks off for a long period of silence. "No way, it just got worse. Personal networks are more complex than digital ones." 17. Revving up. Tom Mueller. As a kid growing up in rural Idaho, Tom Mueller loved playing with model rockets. "I made dozens. Of course, they didn't last long, because I'd always crash them or blow them up." His hometown of St. Mary's, population 2,500, was a logging village about 100 miles south of the Canadian border. His father worked as a lumberjack. "As a kid, I was always helping Dad work on his log truck, using the welders and other tools," Mueller says. "Being hands-on gave me a feel for what would work and what wouldn't." Lanky and sinewy with a dimpled chin and jet-black hair, Mueller had the rough-hewn look of a future lumberjack. But inside he was studious like Musk. He immersed himself in the local library devouring science fiction. For a middle school project, he put crickets inside a model rocket and blasted it off from his backyard to see what effect acceleration would have on them. He learned another lesson instead. The parachutes failed, the rocket smashed to Earth, and the crickets died. At first, he bought rocket kits through the mail, but then he began making his own from scratch. When he was 14, he converted his father's welding torch into an engine. "I injected water into it to see what effect doing that had on its performance," he says. "That's kind of a crazy thing. Adding water gives you more thrust." The project won him second prize at a regional science fair, which qualified him to go to the international finals in Los Angeles. It was the first time he had been on an airplane. "I didn't come close to winning," he says. "There were robots and stuff that the other kids' fathers had built. At least I had done my project myself." He worked his way through the University of Idaho by spending summers and weekends as a logger. When he graduated, he moved to Los Angeles to seek work in aerospace. His grades had not been great, but his enthusiasm was infectious, and that helped get him a job at TRW, which built the rocket engine that took Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the moon. On weekends he would go to the Mojave Desert to test big homemade rockets with fellow members of the Reaction Research Society, a club of rocket enthusiasts founded in 1943. There he partnered with a fellow member, John Garvey, to build what became the world's most powerful amateur rocket engine, weighing 80 pounds. One Sunday in January 2002, while they were working in a rented warehouse on their amateur engine, Garvey mentioned to Mueller that an internet millionaire named Elon Musk wanted to meet him. When Musk arrived accompanied by Justine, Mueller was shouldering the suspended 80-pound engine as he tried to bolt it to a frame. Musk began peppering him with questions. "How much thrust did it have?" 13,000 pounds, Mueller answered. "Have you ever made anything bigger?" Mueller explained that at TRW he had been working on the TR-106, which had 650,000 pounds of thrust. "What were its propellant fuels?" Musk asked. Mueller finally quit bolting his engine so he could concentrate on Musk's rapid-shot questions. Musk asked Mueller whether he could build an engine as big as TRW's TR-106 on his own. Mueller allowed that he had designed the injector and igniter himself, knew the pump system well, and with a team could figure out the rest. "How much," Musk asked, "would it cost?" Mueller replied that TRW was doing it for $12 million. Musk repeated his question. "How much would it cost?" "Oh, my lord, that's a tough one," answered Mueller, who was surprised by how fast the conversation had gotten into specifics. At that point Justine, who was wearing a full-length leather coat, nudged Musk and said it was time to go. He asked Mueller if they could meet the following Sunday. Mueller was reluctant. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and I had just gotten a widescreen TV and wanted to watch the game with some friends. But he sensed it was futile to resist, so he agreed to have Musk over. We watched like maybe one play, because we were so engaged in talking about building a launch vehicle," Mueller says. Along with a few other engineers there, they sketched plans for what became the first SpaceX rocket. The first stage, they decided, would be propelled by engines using liquid oxygen and kerosene. "I know how to make that work easy," Mueller said. Musk suggested hydrogen peroxide for the upper stage, which Mueller thought would be difficult to handle. He countered by suggesting nitrogen tetroxide, which Musk considered too expensive. They ended up agreeing to do liquid oxygen and kerosene on the second stage as well. The football game was forgotten. The rocket was more interesting. Musk offered Mueller the job of head of propulsion, in charge of designing the rocket's engines. Mueller, who had been complaining about the risk-averse culture at TRW, consulted with his wife. "You'll kick yourself if you don't do this," she told him. Mueller thus became SpaceX's first hire. One thing that Mueller insisted on was that Musk put 2 years' worth of compensation into escrow. He was not an internet millionaire, and he did not want to take the chance of being unpaid if the venture failed. Musk agreed. It did, however, cause him to consider Mueller an employee rather than a co-founder of SpaceX. It was a fight he had regarding PayPal and would have again involving Tesla. If you're unwilling to invest in a company, he felt, you shouldn't qualify as a founder. You cannot ask for 2 years of salary in escrow and consider yourself a co-founder, he says. There's got to be some combination of inspiration, perspiration, and risk to be a co-founder. Ignition. Once Musk was able to enlist Mueller and a few other engineers, he needed a headquarters and factory. "We had been meeting in hotel conference rooms," Musk says. "So I started driving through the neighborhoods where most of the aerospace companies are, and I found an old warehouse right near the LA airport. The SpaceX headquarters and the adjoining Tesla design studio are technically in Hawthorne, a town within Los Angeles County next to the airport, but I will refer to the location as Los Angeles." In laying out the factory, Musk followed his philosophy that the design, engineering, and manufacturing teams would all be clustered together. The people on the assembly line should be able to immediately collar a designer or engineer and say, "Why the fuck did you make it this way?" he explained to Mueller. "If your hand is on a stove and it gets hot, you pull it right off, but if it's someone else's hand on the stove, it will take you longer to do something." As his team grew, Musk infused it with his tolerance for risk and reality-bending willfulness. If you were negative or thought something couldn't be done, you were not invited to the next meeting, Mueller recalls. He just wanted people who would make things happen. It was a good way to drive people to do what they thought was impossible. But it was also a good way to become surrounded by people afraid to give you bad news or question a decision. Musk and the other young engineers would work late into the night and then fire up a multiplayer shooter game, such as Quake 3 Arena, on their desktop computers, conference together their cell phones, and plunge into death matches that could last until 3 a.m. Musk's handle was Random 9, and he was, of course, the most aggressive. "We'd be screaming and yelling at each other like a bunch of lunatics," said one employee. "And Elon was right there in the thick of it with us. He was usually triumphant. He's alarmingly good at these games," said another. "He has insanely fast reactions and knew all the tricks and how to sneak up on people." Musk named the rocket they were building Falcon 1, after the spacecraft from Star Wars. He left it to Mueller to name its engines. He wanted cool names, not just letters and numbers. An employee at one of the contractors was a falconer, and she listed the different species of that bird. Mueller picked Merlin for the engines on the first stage and Kestrel for those on the second stage. 18. Musk's rules for rocket building. Question every cost. Musk was laser-focused on keeping down costs. It was not simply because his own money was on the line, though that was a factor. It was also because cost-effectiveness was critical for his ultimate goal, which was to colonize Mars. He challenged the prices that aerospace suppliers charged for components, which were usually 10 times higher than similar parts in the auto industry. His focus on cost, as well as his natural controlling instincts, led him to want to manufacture as many components as possible in-house, rather than buy them from suppliers, which was then the standard practice in the rocket and car industries. At one point SpaceX needed a valve, Mueller recalls, and the supplier said it would cost $250,000. Musk declared that insane and told Mueller they should make it themselves. They were able to do so in months at a fraction of the cost. Another supplier quoted a price of $120,000 for an actuator that would swivel the nozzle of the upper stage engines. Musk declared it was not more complicated than a garage door opener, and he told one of his engineers to make it for $5,000. Jeremy Hallman, one of the young engineers working for Mueller, discovered that a valve that was used to mix liquids in a car wash system could be modified to work with rocket fuel. After a supplier delivered some aluminum domes that go on top of the fuel tanks, it jacked up the price for the next batch. It was like a painter who paints half your house for one price, then wants 3 times that for the rest, says Mark Juncosa, who became Musk's closest colleague at SpaceX. That didn't make Elon too enthusiastic. Musk referred to it as going Russian on him, as the rocket hucksters in Moscow had done. Let's go do this ourselves, he told Juncosa. So a new part of the assembly facility was added to build domes. After a few years, SpaceX was making in-house 70% of the components of its rockets. When SpaceX began producing its first Merlin engines, Musk asked Mueller how much they weighed. About 1,000 pounds, Mueller responded. The Tesla Model S engine, Musk said, weighed about 4,000 pounds and cost about $30,000 to make. So if the Tesla engine is 4 times as heavy as your engine, why does yours cost so fucking much? One reason was that rocket components were subject to hundreds of specifications and requirements mandated by the military and NASA. At big aerospace companies, engineers followed these religiously. Musk did the opposite. He made his engineers question all specifications. This would later become step 1 in a 5-point checklist dubbed the algorithm. That became his oft-repeated mantra when developing products. Whenever one of his engineers cited a requirement as a reason for doing something, Musk would grill them, who made that requirement? And answering the military, or the legal department, was not good enough. Musk would insist that they know the name of the actual person who made the requirement. We would talk about how we were going to qualify an engine or certify a fuel tank, and he would ask, "Why do we have to do that?" says Tim Buzza, a refugee from Boeing who would become SpaceX's vice president of launch and testing. And we would say, "There's a military specification that says it's a requirement." And he'd reply, "Who wrote that? Why does it make sense?" All requirements should be treated as recommendations, he repeatedly instructed. The only immutable ones were those decreed by the laws of physics. Have a maniacal sense of urgency. When Mueller was working on the Merlin engines, he presented an aggressive schedule for completing one of the versions. It wasn't aggressive enough for Musk. "How the fuck can it take so long?" he asked. "This is stupid. Cut it in half." Mueller balked. "You can't just take a schedule that we already cut in half and then cut it in half again," he said. Musk looked at him coldly and told him to stay behind after the meeting. When they were alone, he asked Mueller whether he wanted to remain in charge of engines. When Mueller said he did, Musk replied, "Then when I ask for something, you fucking give it to me." Mueller agreed and arbitrarily cut the schedule in half. "And guess what?" he says. "We ended up developing it in about the time that we had put in that original schedule." Sometimes Musk's insane schedules produced the impossible, sometimes they didn't. "I learned never to tell him no," Mueller says. "Just say you're going to try, then later explain why if it doesn't work out." Musk insisted on setting unrealistic deadlines even when they weren't necessary, such as when he ordered test stands to be erected in weeks for rocket engines that had not yet been built. "A maniacal sense of urgency is our operating principle," he repeatedly declared. The sense of urgency was good for its own sake. It made his engineers engage in first principles thinking. But as Mueller points out, it was also corrosive. If you set an aggressive schedule that people think they might be able to make, they will try to put out extra effort, he says. But if you give them a schedule that's physically impossible, engineers aren't stupid. You've demoralized them. It's Elon's biggest weakness. Steve Jobs did something similar. His colleagues called it his reality distortion field. He set unrealistic deadlines, and when people balked, he would stare at them without blinking and say, "Don't be afraid, you can do it." Although the practice demoralized people, they ended up accomplishing things that other companies couldn't. Even though we failed to meet most schedules or cost targets that Elon laid out, we still beat all of our peers, Mueller admits. We developed the lowest cost, most awesome rockets in history, and we would end up feeling pretty good about it, even if Dad wasn't always happy with us. Learn by failing. Musk took an iterative approach to design. Rockets and engines would be quickly prototyped, tested, blown up, revised, and tried again, until finally something worked. Move fast, blow things up, repeat. It's not how well you avoid problems, Mueller says. It's how fast you figure out what the problem is and fix it. For example, there was a set of military specifications on how many hours each new version of an engine needed to be test-fired under a long list of different conditions. It was a tedious approach and very expensive, Tim Buzza explains. Elon told us just to build one engine and fire it up on the test stand. If it worked, put it on a rocket and fly it. Because SpaceX was a private company, and because Musk was willing to flout rules, it could take the risks it wanted. Buzza and Mueller pushed their engines until they broke, and then said, "Okay, now we know what the limits are." This belief in iterative design meant that SpaceX needed a freewheeling place for testing. At first they considered the Mojave Air and Spaceport, but a county board kept delaying a decision on SpaceX's application in late 2002. "We need to get the hell out of Mojave," Mueller told Musk. "California is difficult." Musk gave a talk that December at Purdue, which has a renowned rocket testing program, and he brought with him Mueller and Buzza. There they met an engineer who had worked for Beale Aerospace, one of the many private rocket companies that had gone bankrupt. He described Beale's abandoned test site outside of McGregor, Texas, about 26 miles east of Waco, and gave them the cell number of a former employee who still lived in the area. Musk decided they should fly there that day. On the way, they called the former employee, Joe Allen, and reached him at Texas State Technical College, where he was studying computer coding after losing his job at Beale. Allen had never heard of Musk or SpaceX, but he agreed to meet them under a tripod on the old testing site. When they landed in Musk's jet, they had no trouble finding the tripod in the desert. It was 110 feet tall. At its base was Allen, standing next to his beat-up old Chevy pickup. "Holy crap," Mueller muttered to Buzza as they walked the site. "Almost everything we need is here." There were test stands and water systems and a blockhouse amid the scrubby grass. Buzza started to enthuse about how well the facility could work. Musk pulled him aside. "Stop saying how good all this is," he said. "You're making it more expensive." Musk ended up hiring Allen on the spot and was able to lease the McGregor site and its abandoned equipment for a mere $45,000 a year. Thus began a buddy movie in which a platoon of die-hard rocket engineers, led by Mueller and Buzza with occasional visits by Musk, ignited engines and set off explosions, which they dubbed rapid unscheduled disassemblies, in a hard-scrabble patch of concrete and rattlesnakes in the Texas desert. The first test firing of a Merlin came on the night of Mueller's birthday, March 11, 2003. The kerosene and liquid oxygen was injected into the thrust chamber and burned for just half a second, which was all they needed to assure that the mechanisms worked. They celebrated with a $1,000 bottle of Remy Martin cognac, which had been a gift to Musk for speaking at a space conference. His assistant, Mary Beth Brown, had given it to Mueller to use when a suitable cause for celebration arose. They polished it off from paper cups. Improvise. Mueller and his team would spend 12-hour days testing engines at McGregor, grab dinner at Outback Steakhouse, then have a late-night conference call with Musk, who peppered them with technical questions. Often he would erupt with the controlled yet searing fury of an engine burn when an engineer did not know an answer. With his tolerance for risk, Musk pushed them to find makeshift solutions. Using machine tools that Mueller had brought to Texas, they would try to make fixes on the spot. One night lightning struck a test stand, knocking out the pressurization system for a fuel tank. That led to a bulge and rip in one of the tank's membranes. In a normal aerospace company, that would have meant replacing the tanks, which would take months. "Nah, just fix it," Musk said. "Go up there with some hammers and just pound it back out, weld it, and we'll keep going." Buzza thought that was nuts, but he had learned to follow the boss's orders. So they went out to the test stand and pounded out the bulge. Musk jumped on his plane to make the 3-hour flight to oversee things personally. "When he showed up, we began testing the tank with gas in it, and it held," Buzza says. "Elon believes that every situation is salvageable. That taught us a lot. And it actually was fun. It also saved SpaceX months in getting its initial rocket tested. Of course, that didn't always work." Musk tried a similar unconventional approach in late 2003 when cracks developed in the heat-diffusing material inside the thrust chambers of the engines. "First one, then two, then three of our first chambers cracked," Mueller recalls. "It was a disaster." When Musk got the bad news, he ordered Mueller to find a way to fix them. "We can't throw them away," he said. "There's no way to fix them," Mueller replied. It was the type of statement that infuriated Musk. He told Mueller to put the 3 chambers on his jet and fly with them to the SpaceX factory in Los Angeles. His idea was to apply a layer of epoxy glue that would seep into the cracks and cure the problem. When Mueller told him that the idea was crazy, they got into a shouting match. Finally, Mueller relented. "He's the boss," he told the team. When the chambers arrived at the factory, Musk was dressed in fine leather boots for a Christmas party he was planning to attend. He never got to the party. He spent all night helping to apply the epoxy and ruining his boots. The gamble failed. As soon as pressure was applied, the epoxy came unstuck. The chambers had to be redesigned, and the schedule for launch slipped 4 months. But Musk's willingness to work all night at the factory pursuing the innovative idea inspired his engineers not to be afraid of trying offbeat fixes. A pattern was set: try new ideas and be willing to blow things up. The residents in the area got used to explosions. The cows, however, did not. Like pioneers circling the wagons, they would run in a circle protecting the young calves in the center when a big bang happened. The engineers at McGregor set up what they called a cow cam, so they could watch. 19 Mr. Musk goes to Washington. Gwynne Shotwell. Musk does not naturally partner with people, either personally or professionally. At Zip2 and PayPal, he showed he could inspire, frighten, and sometimes bully colleagues. But collegiality was not part of his skill set, and deference not in his nature. He does not like to share power. One of the few exceptions was his relationship with Gwynne Shotwell, who joined SpaceX in 2002 and eventually became its president. She has worked with Musk, sitting in a cubicle right next to his at SpaceX headquarters in Los Angeles, for more than 20 years, longer than anyone else. Direct, sharp-spoken, and bold, she prides herself on being mouthy, without crossing the line into disrespect, and she has the pleasant confidence of the high school basketball player and cheerleading captain she once was. Her easygoing assertiveness allows her to speak honestly to Musk without rankling him and to push back against his excesses while not nannying him. She can treat him almost like a peer but still show deference, never forgetting that he's the founder and boss. Born Gwynne Rowley, she grew up in a suburban village north of Chicago. When she was a sophomore in high school, she went with her mother to a panel of the Society of Women Engineers, where she became fascinated by a well-dressed mechanical engineer who had her own construction business. "I want to be like her," she said, and decided to apply to the engineering school at nearby Northwestern University. "I applied because of Northwestern's richness in other fields," she later told students there. "I was terrified of being tagged as a nerd." Now I'm super proud to be one. As she was walking to a job interview with IBM's Chicago area office in 1986, she stopped to watch a television in a store window that was broadcasting the launch of the Space Shuttle Challenger with teacher Krista McAuliffe aboard. What was supposed to be an inspirational moment turned to horror when the Challenger exploded a minute after takeoff. Shotwell was so shaken that she didn't get the job. I must have really sucked eggs on the interview. Eventually she was hired by Chrysler in Detroit, then moved to California, where she became head of space systems sales for Microcosm Incorporated, a startup consulting firm in the same neighborhood as SpaceX. At Microcosm she worked with an adventurous, rugged-faced German engineer named Hans Koenigsmann, who met Musk at one of the weekend gatherings of rocket-launching hobbyists in the Mojave Desert. Musk subsequently went to his house to recruit him, and in May 2002 he became SpaceX's fourth employee. To help him celebrate, Shotwell took Koenigsmann to their favorite neighborhood lunch place, a bright yellow Austrian restaurant called Chef Hannes. Then she drove Koenigsmann a few blocks down the street to drop him off at SpaceX. Come on in, he told her. You can meet Elon. She found herself impressed with Musk's ideas for reducing the costs of rockets and making the parts in-house. He knew the details, she says. But she thought the team was clueless about how to sell its services. The guy you have doing discussions with possible customers is a loser, she told him bluntly. The next day she got a call from Musk's assistant, who said that he wanted to talk to her about becoming vice president of business development. Shotwell had 2 kids, was going through a divorce, and was about to turn 40. The idea of joining a risky startup run by a mercurial millionaire did not have much appeal. She spent 3 weeks considering it before concluding that SpaceX had the potential to transform the sclerotic rocket industry into something that was innovative. I've been a fucking idiot, she told him. I'll take the job. She became the company's 7th employee. Shotwell has a special insight that helps her when dealing with Musk. Her husband has the autism spectrum disorder commonly called Asperger's. People like Elon with Asperger's don't take social cues and don't naturally think about the impact of what they say on other people, she says. Elon understands personalities very well, but as a study, not as an emotion. Asperger's can make a person seem to lack empathy. Elon is not an ass, and yet sometimes he will say things that are very assholey, she says. He just doesn't think about the personal impact of what he's saying. He just wants to fulfill the mission. She does not try to change him, just salve people who get singed. Part of my job is to tend to the wounded, she says. It also helps that she is an engineer. I'm not at his level, but I'm not an idiot. I understand the stuff he's saying, she says. I listen hard, take him seriously, read his intentions, and try to achieve what he wants, even if what he is saying seems crazy initially. When she insists to me that he tends to be right, it can sound as if she's a sycophant, but she actually isn't. She speaks her mind to him, and gets annoyed at those who don't. She names a couple of them and says, they work their asses off, but they are chicken shits around Elon. Wooing NASA. A few months after she joined SpaceX in 2003, Shotwell and Musk traveled to Washington. Their goal was to win a contract from the Defense Department to launch a new breed of small tactical communications satellites, known as TACSAT, that would allow commanders of ground forces to get imagery and other data quickly. They went to a Chinese restaurant near the Pentagon, and Musk broke his tooth. Embarrassed, he kept putting his hand over his mouth, until she started laughing at him. It was the funniest thing, watching him try to hide it. They were able to find a late-night dentist who made a temporary cap so that Musk would be presentable for their Pentagon meeting the next morning. There they sealed the contract, SpaceX's first, for $3.5 million. To drum up public awareness about SpaceX, Musk in December 2003 brought a Falcon 1 rocket to Washington for a public event outside of the National Air and Space Museum. SpaceX built a special trailer with a bright blue cradle to haul the 7-story rocket from Los Angeles, and Musk ordered a production crunch with a crazy deadline to get a prototype of the rocket ready for the trip. To many of the company's engineers, this seemed like a mammoth distraction, but when the rocket was paraded up Independence Avenue with a police escort, it impressed Sean O'Keefe, the administrator of NASA. He dispatched one of his deputies, Liam Sarsfield, to California to assess the spunky startup. SpaceX presents good products and solid potential, Sarsfield reported back. NASA investment in this venture is well warranted. Sarsfield admired Musk's hunger for information on highly technical issues, ranging from the docking system of the International Space Station to the ways that engines can overheat. They engaged in an extended email correspondence on these and other issues. But in February 2004, the exchange grew testy when NASA awarded a $227 million contract, without competitive bidding, to a rival private rocket company, Kistler Aerospace. The contract was for rockets that could resupply the International Space Station, something that Musk, rightly, as it turned out, thought SpaceX could do. Sarsfield made the mistake of giving Musk an honest explanation. Kistler had been awarded the no-bid contract, he wrote, because its financial arrangements are shaky, and NASA did not want it to go bankrupt. There would be other contracts for SpaceX to bid on, Sarsfield assured Musk. That infuriated Musk, who contended that NASA should be in the business of promoting innovation, not propping up companies. Musk met with officials at NASA headquarters in May 2004 and, ignoring the advice of Shotwell, decided to sue them over the Kistler contract. Everyone told me that it might mean we would never be able to work with NASA, Musk says. But what they did was wrong and corrupt, so I sued. He even threw Sarsfield, his strongest advocate within NASA, under the bus by including in the lawsuit his friendly email explaining that the contract was meant to be a lifeline for Kistler. SpaceX ended up winning the dispute, and NASA was ordered to open the project to competitive bidding. SpaceX was able to win a significant portion of it. That was a huge upset. Literally imagine, like, a 10-to-1 odds underdog winning, Musk told the Washington Post's Christian Davenport. It blew everyone's mind. Fixed-price contracts. The victory was crucial not only for SpaceX but for the American space program. It promoted an alternative to the cost-plus contracts that NASA and the Defense Department had generally been using. Under those contracts, the government kept control of a project, such as building a new rocket or engine or satellite, and issued detailed specifications of what it wanted done. It would then award contracts to big companies such as Boeing or Lockheed Martin, which would be paid all of their costs plus a guaranteed profit. This approach became standard during World War II to give the government complete control over the development of weapons and to prevent the perception that contractors were war profiteering. On his trip to Washington, Musk testified before a Senate committee and pushed a different approach. The problem with a cost-plus system, he argued, was that it stymied innovation. If the project went over budget, the contractor would get paid more. There was little incentive for the cozy club of cost-plus contractors to take risks, be creative, work fast, or cut costs. Boeing and Lockheed just want their cost-plus gravy trains, he says. You just can't get to Mars with that system. They have an incentive never to finish. If you never finish a cost-plus contract, then you suckle on the tit of the government forever. SpaceX pioneered an alternative, in which private companies bid on performing a specific task or mission, such as launching government payloads into orbit. The company risked its own capital, and it would be paid only if and when it delivered on certain milestones. This outcomes-based, fixed-price contracting allowed the private company to control, within broad parameters, how its rockets were designed and built. There was a lot of money to be made if it built a cost-efficient rocket that succeeded, and a lot of money to be lost if it failed. It rewards results rather than waste, Musk says.